Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. This video is The Critical Role, a mathematical look into the ability scores of the player characters in Season 4 of Critical Role. You may have noticed that the player characters in Season 4 have very, very good ability scores, sometimes almost godlike ability scores, especially for relatively low-level players. How can this be possible? I compiled a table of all 13 known sets of player character ability scores. This may be somewhat out of date as more characters are being added later on in the game, but these are the 13 player characters that I had. I've included the total of the 6 ability scores per player, as well as their mean ability score. I've also compiled a mean of each ability score, so the mean strength, the mean dexterity, and so on. And I've highlighted any ability score that's starting out as 18 or higher. One thing to note is that these include the bonuses that you get in character creation, either based on background, as is the current case, or if you are using an older version, this would be what you got from your player species. There are some very, very high sets of numbers here. Standing out is Valius, Ashley Johnson's character, with a total of 98 points of ability score. That's an average of 16.3. The lowest is Sam Riegel's character, Wakanda, but even his total is 80, which is an average of 13.3. And that's amazing. I would consider about 75 points to be average using the standard method of roll 4, drop 1. And that's a little bit higher than, say, standard array or point buy, but it's close. They're in the low 70s, low to mid 70s. Anything over 80 is good, but to have 98 really stands out. The other thing that stands out is Thimble, Laura Bailey's character, with a strength of 3. I think this has been an allocated stat rather than a rolled one, because Thimble is a tiny character, a pixie. I think she's described as being 4 inches, that's 10 centimeters tall. I think 3 was given as an ability score. So because that doesn't feel like a rolled score, I'm going to be ignoring Thimble during the mathematical analysis part of this. But even as we look through, every single character has a really good set of ability scores, with multiple characters starting with 2 ability scores at 18 or higher. That's incredible. The average total for the players is 88. That would be 85 before the bonuses and character creation. The mean ability score for all the abilities is 14.7. And when we factor in those +1s and +2s, that would then reduce it to 14.2 based on the dice rolls. And the standard deviation for those ability scores is 2.93. Again, let's take away the +1s and +2s that you get in character creation. The standard deviation is now likely 2.43. I say likely because I don't know exactly where those bonuses went. My assumption is that they were added to the highest scores. If you have a starting score of 20, it must have been an 18 with a +2 added to it. If you have a starting score of 19, it was likely a 17 with a +2 or an 18 with a +1. My general feeling on character creation is that you use those ability bonuses on your best scores to push them even higher. And that's what I have assumed. I could be wrong, but that's what I've assumed. So the standard deviation for the rolled scores is 2.43. And again, I'm excluding Thimble from all of this data. Now we can do a little bit of mathematical analysis to see what is going on, because we learnt that Brandon Lee Mulligan didn't use the standard roll 4, drop 1 algorithm. Roll 4, drop 1 means you roll 4 six-sided dice, you drop the lowest value, and you add the 3 remaining ones together, and that's how you get your ability score. What we've learnt is that he did roll 5, drop 2. You roll 5 six-sided dice, you take away the 2 lowest values, and the 3 remaining ones are what you use. This should push the values of those ability scores higher. It will also reduce the variation. You will get a smaller standard deviation. Having a larger population of dice and then removing the smallest ones will cluster the remaining results around higher values more tightly than roll 4, drop 1. So our mathematical analysis should show us a higher mean and lower standard deviation for roll 5, drop 2. So this is 3d6. This is the old school way of doing it. You roll 3 dice, you add them together, and that's your ability score. What you'll notice is that the distribution of results is symmetrical, that the very high and very low values are equally likely. And the most frequent values are the ones in the middle, between 10 and 11. If we compare that to roll 4, drop 1, you'll see that roll 4, drop 1 skews the results higher. The higher results are more likely, the lower results are less likely, and the most common results are a little bit higher. If we continue the trend, we can compare roll 5, drop 2 with roll 4, drop 1, and what you get is the same but more so. The lower results are even less likely, the higher results are even more likely, and again, the average result has been pushed a little bit higher and is more dominant. You are more likely to roll a 14 with roll 5, drop 2 than you are a 13 with roll 4, drop 1. Here is the results summary. What you can see is a comparison between roll 5, drop 2, roll 4, drop 1, and straight 3d6. If you want to pause the video to look at the table in more details, that's absolutely fine. But the important bit is the summary of the means. The mean for 3d6 is 10.5. The mean for 4d6 drop 1 is 12.24. And the mean for 5d6 drop 2 is 13.43. So in each step, the mean is getting better. The standard deviation for 3d6 is 2.42. The standard deviation for roll 4, drop 1 is 2.32. And the standard deviation for roll 5, drop 2 is 2.12. So with each step, the standard deviation is becoming smaller. That distribution is becoming tighter. And the total for the arrays, well, for 3d6, the total across the 6 ability scores should be 63. For roll 4, drop 1, it's 73.5. And for roll 5, drop 2, it's 80.6. Now, one thing I will add is that roll 4, drop 1 and roll 5, drop 2 are no longer perfectly normally distributed. They are skewed in favour of the higher numbers. They are approximately a bell curve in that the numbers around the mean are the most common, and as you move away from the mean, the values become less frequent, but they are not perfectly symmetrical. There are some mathematical tools you can use on data that is either normally distributed or approximately normally distributed, and I will be using one of those tools later. So it is worth noting that roll 5, drop 2 and roll 4, drop 1 are roughly normally distributed, but not perfectly so. Let's compare this theoretical model for roll 5, drop 2 and what we actually see with the critical role ability scores. The mean for roll 5, drop 2 was 13.43, but the mean of the critical role characters, excluding Thimble, was 14.2. That's quite a bit higher. The standard deviation for roll 5, drop 2 was 2.12, but the standard deviation for the characters of critical role is 2.43. This is unusual. A higher standard deviation implies that there are more results further away from the mean. And what we can see is that there are not more lower results, there are more higher results. There are fewer low results than we expect and more high results than we expect. This has spread the distribution out more, but it's spread the distribution out more in the direction of higher results. This is quite unusual. How unusual? Well, I think it is worth doing something called a hypothesis test. In mathematics, if we have a set of data, we can compare it using various tools to other sets of data or other theoretical models. In this case, I'm going to use something called a one-sample t-test. A one-sample t-test allows us to compare a set of data against an expected mean and standard deviation. So in this case, I have a set of data being the ability scores rolled by the critical role characters, and I have a mean from the roll 5 drop 2 model, which I've obtained mathematically. And I can compare these two data sets. The formula is shown here. It's not particularly complicated if you're mathy. If you're not mathy, it means nothing to you. X bar, that's the X with a little hat, is the mean of the sample group. Minus mu, that's the thing that looks a bit like a U with a tail in the wrong place, that is the theoretical mean. That is all divided by another little division. Sigma, that little O with a tick on it, that's the standard deviation of the sample. And the square root of n, well, that's the square root of the number of data entries. Okay, I can drop those numbers in. The mean of the sample is 14.17. The theoretical mean is 13.43. The standard deviation of the sample is 2.43. And the number of data entries is, well, 12 player characters and 6 ability scores per character. That's 12 times 6. I do this calculation and I get a value of 2.58. This is my critical value, 2.58. What does that mean? Well, we look up this value on a big table and we compare it to the values on the table, which give us a clue of what's going on. The table compares a critical value, the number of data entries called the degrees of freedom, and our confidence level. The confidence level in this case is what are the chances that this data set came about randomly in a fair way. And I'm going to take this all the way to 1%. What are the chances that this could just be the best 1% of rolls possible using roll 5 drop 1? Well, the critical value on the table is 2.4 and our calculated value exceeds that. What this means is it is unlikely that this is the best 1% of results. It's just too good. These numbers were not generated using roll 5 drop 2, and I am 99% confident in that. I am mathematically better than 99% confident that something fishy is going on. And as I mentioned before, what seems to be happening is that we don't have enough low values and we have too many high values. I think this is compelling evidence that Brennan Lee Mulligan has allowed players to either fudge their ability score rolls or has granted them re-rolls on low values until they get a set of ability scores which is mutually acceptable. He has been very generous. He has allowed the player characters to use a dice mechanic, roll 5 drop 2, which is more generous with ability scores, and on top of that he has allowed player characters to re-roll bad scores and to get some truly epic ability scores. The question is, why? One of the great things about doing this channel for me is that it has allowed me to explore the philosophy of roleplay games through mathematics. I start off with a question. Why is this happening? What's going on? Can I describe this? And as I do the maths and learn about the process, it asks questions which I then have to answer for myself. And doing this process gave me the question, why would you give your player characters better ability scores? Because that's what's happened. Those player ability scores, character ability scores are amazing. That's a conscious choice that Brennan Lee Mulligan has made for this game. But why? That brings me to the interesting part of this video, if you don't find the maths interesting. If you do find the maths interesting, well, you're in for a double ride today. How can players fail? That's the question that really came up. What is failing in Dungeons & Dragons, or any tabletop roleplay game, really? And I narrowed it down to 3 simple reasons. Players can fail because they have incompetent characters. Now, incompetent characters is not the same as incompetent players. Incompetent characters is their characters are not very good. They can fail because of bad dice rolls. And they can fail because of poor choices by the players themselves. I think each of those 3 reasons is worth looking into. Let's start with incompetent characters. What does this mean? Well, incompetent characters are characters that are not very good at doing anything, really, or who might be good at doing something but are terrible at other things, and they keep doing the things they're terrible at. That's how incompetency shines through. And the important thing to say here is that it is not very heroic to be failing all the time. Now, I don't believe that Dungeons & Dragons characters should be good at everything. But as part of telling a story, playing a game and having fun, characters who are good at something and get to do that thing they're good at tend to create enjoyable gaming moments. It's not heroic if you're failing at every task you're doing. Now, that's not to say that failure cannot be fun. There are roleplay games where failing again and again and again is actually the main part of the game. One of my favourite games is called Fiasco. It's by Bully Pulpit Games, and it is a game of ambition, incompetence, and failure. And your characters will fail in the most spectacular way, and it's your job to tell a compelling story about how that happens. And it's a great game, and it's a fun game, but it's not Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is a heroic fantasy game, or the way people play Dungeons & Dragons is a heroic fantasy game. So having incompetent characters is not very Dungeons & Dragons. And it doesn't move the story on. If you are a dungeon master, you have a story that you want your players to play. If they keep failing at every task and challenge they're given, the story can naturally grind to a halt. Now, this isn't always a bad thing in a home game. You can improvise, you can adapt, you can change the story. But Critical Role is not a home game. One thing that's really important to remember about Critical Role is that it is an entertainment product. They are making a product for other people to watch and enjoy. And part of that is having a story where the characters progress through that story. But the other part of that is logistical. There needs to be a degree of setup of things that will happen, and the characters need to progress through that. Now, in interviews with Matt Mercer, he has said there have been so many things that he's set up that the characters never got to. Entire battle maps, entire sets, miniatures, characters they never met. And that's okay, that's part of being a dungeon master. You create things that are beautiful and magical and wonderful, and your players never use them. But if you are creating a product, an entertainment product for people to enjoy, there has to be a point where certain things in the story need to happen. And moving the story on is really important. So if the characters keep failing at all the tasks and challenges they're given, it's not going to be as fulfilling an entertainment product. So having non-incompetent characters is an important part of Critical Role. And I can see why giving your player characters higher ability scores to help them succeed and move the story on is entirely justified. The next reason why characters fail is bad dice rolls. The best player and the best character can still be brought low by terrible luck. It's happened to me, it's happened to everyone, and that's okay. There is a philosophy that the dice tell a story, and I somewhat subscribe to that idea, but not fully. For me, the players tell the story. The dice add flavour. Good dice rolling tells us that the story went better than expected. Bad dice rolling tells us that there were more challenges and obstacles and extra steps the players have to do to get through them. I would hate to play in a game where mission critical encounters were entirely bypassed through terrible dice rolling. You know, if the party is wandering through a desert and they're searching for an oasis and they keep failing every perception check that they make, do you let them die of dehydration and exposure? Or do they get to find the oasis but with an added complication to it? I find that the game works better from a player's perspective and probably from an audience perspective as well if the dice rolls don't determine purely success or failure, but add flavour to success or failure. It's also hard to plan around these dice rolls. Like I said before, if you have encounters which are important to the story and the players keep missing them because of terrible perception checks or investigation checks, what do? Do you pause the story and let them spend another week wandering around the wilderness? Or do you push the story on but add in obstacles and complications later? One thing about having player characters with higher ability scores is that you are somewhat hedging against terrible dice rolls. Giving players a +1 or +2 on their rolls over what they would have had otherwise means that this terrible luck is just less likely to happen. And again, I'm okay with that. You can still add complications for persistently bad rolling or further rewards for persistently good rolling, but not allow it to disrupt the flow of the story. That's okay. The third reason for failure in games is poor choices by players. And I think this is a really important thing. Dungeon masters are encouraged to reward players who play the game, who follow the story clues, who understand the world that the dungeon master has created and the finer points of whatever mission or task they are doing. At the same time, dungeon masters can penalise players who are willfully ignoring plot elements, who are causing chaos and disruption where they should be there trying to save people. There is a thing of death by consequences. Player choice is one of the most important things to me. But this is a game, and players who play the game, whose characters embody what the game is about, can be rewarded through gameplay features, and players who are not doing that can suffer the consequences of their actions in-game. I favour player failure by choice. If players choose to put themselves in dangerous situations, if they choose to ignore warning signs, if they choose to ignore the looming threat to go after meaningless side quests, then that has actual consequences. The dice that they roll adds flavour to it. The competency of their character should not be the determining factor in success and failure. So because of that, having player characters with higher ability scores can be an important way to keep the story going, to keep the players on track, and to make a more fun game or a more entertaining product. So with those three factors in mind, Brennan Lee Mulligan giving the player characters of Critical Role incredibly good ability scores actually makes sense. Now, would I want this in a regular home game? Well, I'm in two minds about this. So if any of my future dungeon masters or current dungeon masters who might be starting new games end up watching this video, this is not necessarily me asking, hey, can we use roll 5 drop 2? I'm going to put my hand on my heart and say I would never refuse higher ability scores. I like my player characters feeling powerful in the world that they're in. I like them to be competent, and I like the choices that better ability scores unlock. But it's not necessary. As long as I have a character where I feel that they can do the things they're supposed to do well enough, I can enjoy the game. So I'm not going to say no to higher ability scores, but it's not a deal breaker for me. As long as I have a character who is fun to play with and has enough power to have agency within the game, I'm okay. Sure, roll 5 drop 2 makes your characters more heroic, and that's a good thing. There are still problems with it, though. There is still a huge variation between the players. Comparing Sam Riegel's and Ashley Johnson's characters, the difference in the total of their ability scores is 18. That's 3 per ability score. Getting a +3 on every ability score is an enormous boon, and I don't like any system where that can happen to player characters. Now, point buy and standard array are much more egalitarian, but I don't particularly like them either for other reasons. I like rolling for character scores because it makes a character feel more personal, and there's always that chance of getting higher numbers, and I'm always chasing that chance of getting great ability scores. You can't do that with standard array, and you can't do that with point buy. Are there other systems that could work even better than that? Certainly. But let's look at the weaknesses before we change it. What are the weaknesses of the current system, either roll 4 drop 1 or roll 5 drop 2? Well, the first and biggest weakness for me is that it's just too much. I think it's not good that player characters can start with an ability score at 20 at level 1. If you get lucky and roll an 18 on one of your ability scores, and then you put your +2 in it, either from your background or your player species, you're starting with an ability score at 20 at level 1. And 20 is the best a player character can do without magic items or level 20 features. Having that at level 1 doesn't feel right to me. Conversely, if you end up with an ability score of 8 in a dump stat, there's a very good chance that it's going to stay 8 all the way up to level 20. And having a level 20 character who hasn't gotten any better and still has this one incredibly low ability score also feels a little bit wrong. Now, when you're leveling up your characters and getting your ability scores, the game is mechanically rewarding you for specialization. Adding a +2 to an ability score that's already good is better than bringing a low ability score up. The game rewards you for specialization, and as a counterexample, penalizes you for not specializing. So it's entirely possible that you have a level 1 character with a 20 in one ability score and an 8 in another, and that doesn't change even when they're at level 20. And that doesn't feel right to me. Another problem with the current system is that there is very low progression. Most player characters, even if they get all the way up to level 20, will only ever have +4 or 5 sets of ability score increases. And I would wager that most of the time they end up taking a feat rather than an ability score increase. Now, in the 2024 version of Dungeons and Dragons, that has been somewhat mitigated because I believe every feat that you can take after character creation is a half feat. There is a +1 included to an ability score in there. But even then, that's still not that much progression. The chances are that your ability scores will not grow much between level 1 and level 20. That doesn't feel great to me. The current system is also very unequitable. Everyone might have the same opportunity when they pick the dice up, but those dice are fickle, and you can have a huge variation between player characters. This does not sit right with me. I would like a more equitable system. Point buy and standard array are perfectly equitable, but again, they fail on this low progression metric. And finally, there is the feat dilemma. There are a lot of great feats in Dungeons and Dragons, and pretty much every player character will have at least 3 or 4 feats where they can go, that would be amazing for my build. What this means is that there is great pressure to not take ability score increases and instead just take feats. Like I said, this is somewhat mitigated in the 2024 version of Dungeons & Dragons by the fact that everything is a half feat, but I would have gone the other direction. I would have decoupled feats and ability score increases completely. So it's not a choice. Your choice is which feat do I want to take, not should I take a feat or an ability score. With all this in mind, what would I do? Well, I've proposed this in a video a while ago, but I'll give a quick summary now. I would propose a system where players start at a lower level but climb faster. I like the idea of constant character progression. The idea of getting an ability score increase with every level up appeals to me. And not a completely free ability score increase either. There is some restrictions in what you can take that also bolster your lower ability scores. How would this work? Okay. All player characters start with a standard array, 14, 14, 12, 10, 10, 8. There are no further bonuses on character creation. Nothing from your player species, nothing from your background. In addition to that, there are no half feats. No feats offer any ability score increases anymore. Instead, you get an ability score increase every time you level up. What you can do is you add 1 to an ability score of your choice, and then you increase your lowest ability score by 1. If your lowest ability scores are tied, then you choose which one gets the +1. You can do this before you level up your class. So if you want to try and meet some multi-class restrictions, you can take your ability score increase and then change class. That's fine. There is also a score cap by level. From levels 1 to 5, no ability score may be higher than 16. From levels 6 to 10, no ability score can be higher than 18. At levels 11 to 15, that cap is increased to 20. And for levels 16 and above, that cap is now 22. What you will see is a constant progression with your ability scores. They start lower than standard array, roll 4, drop 1, point buy. But by the time you get to level 5 or 6, they're about equal. And as you surpass level 5 and 6, your ability scores end up being a bit higher on average. And by the time you get to level 15, your ability scores are fantastic. But and this is the important bit. By the time you get to higher levels in Tier 3 and Tier 4, your ability scores are not as important as your class features. It's still nice, and by having your primary ability scores at high level by that point, you can get the most out of your character. But more importantly, perhaps, is that your lowest ability scores will also have increased significantly. You will no longer be cripplingly vulnerable to charisma saves if you've focused everything on strength and constitution, for example. This will create a more rounded character who still has strengths and weaknesses, but not catastrophically so. I like this idea of constant progression. I like not being hindered by unlucky dice rolling early on. I like the fact that it is entirely equitable between players, that everyone has the same set of numbers to work with. And I like the fact that you can still build really powerful characters, but you have to earn those ability scores as you level up. You don't start with a level 20, with a strength of 20, which, let's be fair, that seems a bit unfair having that at level 1. So, those are my thoughts on this. Bruneley Mulligan, for better or worse, I'm 99% sure that you fudged those numbers, and I'm okay with it. I would love to know exactly the process that went on. I'd love to know which characters got rerolls. I'd love to know what values were dumped and replaced. Whether we'll ever find out for sure, who knows? Maybe that's a secret that a dungeon master and a player should keep between them. But I think it's interesting, and I think it's worth revisiting how ability scores are handled in Dungeons & Dragons, both in character creation and through character progression. There's a lot of room for improvement in this game, and I'm happy to go along on the journey. So, I hope you enjoyed the maths and the analysis. Please let me know your opinions on this matter, and enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.